Morning, everybody. After 20 years, Afghanistan is once again under Taliban rule after the group seized Kabul and effectively took control of the country. Militants moved into the capital yesterday, sparking chaos with roads gridlocked and thousands of people attempting to flee. This was the scene at Kabul airport in the last few hours, where people have been desperately trying to get on board an aircraft. All commercial flights have been suspended. The US official says troops trying to secure the airport have fired shots in the air to try to prevent hundreds of people from running onto the tarmac. The official described the crowd as out of control. These are the scenes on the streets of Kabul, with the Taliban manning makeshift security checkpoints, halting traffic and checking inside vehicles. Last night, Taliban fighters entered the presidential palace after the President Ghani fled the country. The Taliban says it promises an open, inclusive Islamic government for Afghanistan. Secretary Ben. Let's speak to the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace joining us now. Hello to you, Mr. Wallace. Thank you for joining us on the programme, as you did last Friday morning. Talk to me, if you would, as the UK's Defence Secretary. How did you feel as you witnessed the scenes yesterday in Kabul? Through strategic patience, the Taliban has won this war.
Well, I think, as I both spoke to you last week and indeed in the article I wrote for the Sunday Telegraph, look, I think we all saw that and felt a real sense of sadness that, first of all, the forces that the British and the international community had invested in had melted away in some areas so quickly. I think it was always the lessons that I felt were incredibly important, is that you don't fix things overnight in global issues. You have to manage them. And, ultimately, as I said a number of times publicly, when that deal was done a few years ago, what happened was ultimately we undermined the community. The deal undermined the Afghan government and left it in a place that ultimately saw the end. And the end is always, I'm afraid, the river flows fastest towards the end. And that is what we saw yesterday, and it's what we're seeing in our pictures today. But, my job as Defence Secretary is to make sure that we protect not only the UK nationals, but those Afghans we have an obligation to. That is actually why we're in the country. For the last few weeks, we've been in the country solely to process those people and to make sure we protect our officials doing that job, and we'll continue to do so.
So you acknowledge that the Taliban has won the war?
I don't know if it's about a win. I think I acknowledge that the Taliban are in control of the country. I mean, you don't have to be a political scientist to spot that's where we're at. I have engaged through a third country yesterday to make sure we seek assurances from the Taliban to protect our people and indeed the people we're trying to work to get out.
And you don't have to be a political scientist to figure out whether or not NATO can regroup and go back to take over Kabul again. I'm guessing at this stage that's not on the cards.
No, look, that's not on the cards, that we're going to go back. If you remember, at its height, over 100,000 troops were deployed into Afghanistan to hold the line. That wasn't just the initial, obviously, 2001, 2002 intervention. That was, almost a decade later, heavy fighting. And I think, the United States have made itself clear that they're not intending to stay. And as the framework nation, that leaves us with difficult choices. And, I've been pretty much honest about that all the way through this process. And actually why, as I said, our defence strategy and our defence reform programme that we put in place back in March is designed so that we're no longer so dependent on one power or the other. It's why we had a record funding settlement, so that in future, should something like this happen again, we can find it easier to find international partners to remain.
OK, we are where we are. You're drawing up plans for an airlift. Britain is set to evacuate its citizens. Talk to me about the logistics as best you can. How many people are we talking about? How long is it going to take, and when will it start?
So it started already. Only yesterday, nearly 300 people came back. I've just been, like you, seeing the footage of the airport that's been going on at the moment. The military side of the airport, so the footage you're seeing is from the south side, the civilian side. The military side of the airport is secure and controlled, and military flights are coming in and out. And I think on Friday when I spoke to you, I told you we had a plan B, which was if civilian flights stop, we will use military flights. That is what we're doing. The military flights are coming in and out. They've just brought in more UK soldiers, border forces joining us to make sure that we accelerate the process to get more Afghans out, which is our obligation. We flew out 370 staff and British citizens, eligible personnel yesterday and the day before, and we'll continue to engage those flights. The next group of Afghans to come out will be 782, and we will make sure we get them in the next 24 to 36 hours out of the country, and I'll continually to process those people.
How many emergency visas can we process for those who risk their lives for the UK in the time that's left?
Well, we've processed over 2,000 plus since April with their families, and they're all back in the UK, located with their families. And myself and the Home Secretary, I spoke to her all through yesterday, and I'll continue to speak to her today. We are processing as fast as we can, and where there are sort of rules that we need to change, we are changing those rules. And so today I'll be speaking to Priti Patel about how we can deal with Afghan passports. Right up until the day before yesterday, the Afghans wouldn't let Afghans leave without their passport. If they've already been through our checks and we know who they are, we need to see if we can make sure that we adapt the rules to get those people out as soon as we can. And we will cycle them out from Afghanistan to a Middle East country and then back to the United Kingdom, so we can keep the flow of aeroplanes in and out. And our target is at least about 1,200 to 1,500 exit a day in the capacity of our aeroplanes, and we'll keep that flowing. And we've secured a place within the airport that we can process people securely and then marshal them onto the planes. 2,000
is not enough, though, is it, as far as the interpreters are concerned? Are we processing many more than that at the moment, given the situation that is developing, and some have already been killed, others surely will be?
Yeah, so first of all, it's not just interpreters, it's public-facing roles and even essential non-public facing roles. It's also contractors. A few weeks ago, Priti Patel and I changed the rules to make sure third-party contractors were able to come through because that was important. And then also third country processing. There are a significant number who've got themselves out of Afghanistan over the last few weeks, and they are in camps, refugee camps around the world. We brought a guy back in April, as long as from April, and his family from a Greek refugee camp. We're going to be processing them wherever they are, and we're going to continue to do that after we've gone. But look, you're right, Kay. It's really important for us. These are people. I've been as blunt as I can, saying that we will do everything we can to bring as many people out as possible. And our soldiers, the 600 we've flown in from 16 Air Assault Brigade, they are on the ground specifically and for only one job, which is the processing of British citizens and Afghans to bring them back. We're not there for any other government function. That's what those men and women are now risking their lives to do. And quite rightly so, that is our obligation. And we will do that for as long as we can.
Yeah, the Taliban has other ideas. The spokesperson, Suhail Shaheen, saying we need all Afghans to stay. We're saying we need those that have fought side by side with us or represented us in some other way can come back to the UK. That sounds like a bit of a standoff. How are we going to fix that?
Well, I spoke to a Middle East country yesterday who contacted the Taliban on my behalf, the military leadership of the Taliban, to seek assurances. And the assurance I got back from that leadership was that these people would not be interfered with, and that they wanted to demonstrate that people could come and go to Afghanistan as freely as possible. And that have also, that they obviously want Western troops out of their country. So it's not in their interest to impede all of that. And we will make sure that we continue to do that.
Last time the Taliban was in charge, 41,000 people sought asylum in the United Kingdom from Afghanistan. How many asylum seekers are we expecting this time?
I don't know, but I suspect we will see significant migrant flows around the world. My Turkish counterpart is dealing with significant inflows. I know that the Iranians historically usually take huge amounts of refugees, Pakistan, India as well. And I think, it's not a comfort to this situation, but back in March when we did our defence reform paper, I recognised that conflict prevention and post-conflict work is as important as war fighting, because the threat to our stability from migrant flows, organised crime, smuggling, terrorism is very, very important. We have to be out around the world to deliver that stability. And so,
but we can expect at least as many this time, can't we?
Well, I'm not going to put a figure on it. If the Taliban are true to the words that you've also read out on your programme about an inclusive Islamic State, but nevertheless,
do you think they will be?
Well, I certainly think they will not miss the lesson of 2011 that hosting terrorists and indeed running a state as they did led to rampant poverty, migration, immigration or refugee crises, and indeed the toppling of that regime. Those are facts that happened 20 years ago. And certainly the political leadership of the Taliban recognise that. So, on that sense, the onus is on them to do that. And so in the meantime, I am focused about getting those people out, those Brits out, those Afghans out, and actually working together with our allies, whether it's Turkey or whether it's Qatar or whether it's other Middle East countries, to make sure that we help stabilise the situation.
We are already hearing of executions of those who worked with the NATO forces, women literally being turned away from their places of learning. It doesn't look, anecdotally, as though the Taliban has changed much.
Anecdotally, no, that bit does not look like a change. And I think we have to make sure that the Taliban leadership lead their country. And, if there are provinces or groups that are behaving like that, both the European Union, the United Kingdom and the USA have been very clear that, the leadership has a responsibility to make sure that it upholds human rights, as does the Quran, actually. The Quran does not accept many of these things, and that is a wrongful interpretation of the Quran. So I think that it's really, really important that the Taliban recognise they're on display now. The international community is watching. They want the finances, they want the flow of money, they want the aid, they want to be accepted as a national leadership, then they're going to have to deliver that.
How prepared are you for the Taliban flag to be flying over the UK embassy in Kabul?
Well, look, that's the consequence of the Taliban. It's not the embassy anymore. We have left that location. We've drawn down within the airport, as have a member of other nations. Many of the EU have relocated. So it's now just a building. But in the end of the day, symbolically, it's not what any of us wanted.
OK. Will you recognise the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan?
I think there is a lot of more to come before those decisions are made. I think the Taliban have to match their words with what they say. I think the time is not right yet. The proof of the pudding will be obviously in their actions rather than their rhetoric. OK. How frustrated were you that the Foreign Secretary was on holiday abroad when all this was unfolding? I don't know where he was, as in whether
he was in Cyprus, I believe.
I don't know my colleague's personal movements. What I do know is every single day I spoke to the Foreign Secretary. Every day I had no problems, nor did the Prime Minister or anyone else engaging with the Foreign Office. The Foreign Office has been in lockstep with the MOD, who have been at the forefront of delivering this alongside the Home Office. I have not been aware of any drop in service or inability to deliver. The whole of government has been tasked on this. The Prime Minister convened his first COBRA a few days ago and a second one yesterday, and we're all determined to deliver the solution.
Can we end where we started, please? The Taliban are not known to be patient, except potentially these last 2 decades when they wanted to take back their country. They certainly seem to have managed that over the last 24 hours. They won't take too long before they decide that they want the airport back. We have a finite amount of time to get Brits and those who help the Brits out. What's your timescale?
Well, our declared timescale was by the end of the month and the first week of September. But recognising exactly what you say, we are doing everything, and we'll be doing it today, to remove any further barriers to make sure we can rush through both Afghans and British citizens to make sure that we can process them and get them out of the country as soon as possible.
By the end of the month?
Well, that was our original timetable, but I recognise as the facts on the ground change, Kay, we have to change too, which is why the Home Secretary and I have been working absolutely hand in hand in the last few weeks to make sure we remove those barriers. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor have been incredibly supportive in delivering that, and we will move one. If we have to move regulations today, we'll be doing exactly that.
Thank you for joining us, Defence Secretary.
Thank you.
So it's a race against time, isn't it? The streets of Kabul virtually deserted today, with government offices, embassies and shops all closed. The Taliban says its fighters have been ordered to allow civilians to go about their daily lives. But it's clear the city and Afghanistan as a whole has woken up to a new future. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, is in Kabul and watched as the Taliban entered Afghanistan's capital.
We'd been warned, but this was the first time that we realised something was happening. Gunfire followed by people running. Police vehicles suddenly appearing on the streets that were emptying fast. Within minutes, helicopter gunships appeared over the presidential palace and government buildings in the centre of Kabul. Anti-missile systems firing chaff into the air. The Taliban had entered the city and the American pilots knew it. For hours they circled above, but there was nothing they could do to stop the takeover of the capital. Occasional gunfire ripped through the air. Throughout the day, Chinook helicopters ferried United States Embassy staff to the international airport. Road moves deemed far too dangerous. It harked back to the images of the ignominious retreat of the US from Vietnam. An image President Biden said wouldn't be repeated, but this still photograph may well come back to haunt the president in the days to come. In Kabul, crowds gathered to welcome the Taliban. They greeted speakers with enthusiasm. Inside the presidential palace, they rammed home this remarkable takeover, posing in the offices of power, a power that after 2 decades of trying has failed to finish them. The tension in Kabul has been at bursting point. As we left our hotel to see what was going on, the Taliban were right in front of us. They stared, but let us pass. It won't be like this for long. These streets are usually heaving with people and cars. They were deserted. Traffic jams are a permanent fixture here, the reason army and police checkpoints. Now, though, we pass through unimpeded. These heavily armed mini-fortresses now unmanned. Once again, the Afghan soldiers have melted away.
Well, in just a very short while after the arrival of the Taliban and news had spread through the city, the streets are really empty. I mean, we were here only a day or so ago, and in the hours from this morning we could see it was absolutely chock-a-block with people. Now it's pretty quiet, pretty empty. A lot of people have just gone home. There's no real sort of authority on the streets anymore.
This population knows what's coming. Some of the changes are subtle. No jeans and t-shirts now. They've changed into traditional shalwar kameez clothing, and there's no women to be seen. And no images of women on beauty salon windows either. Whitewashed. The president's words of security infer order. At the airport, there wasn't much of that to be seen. There's a mad scramble to get on flights that have been cancelled and onto military flights to which there's no access. The roads clogged with traffic and Afghan military vehicles, moving in all directions, but mainly away from the Taliban. On the roadside, the latest arrivals from battles around the country drag their belongings along the dusty roads, looking for somewhere to stay. None will forget the day the Taliban returned. Their 20-year war is won. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Kabul.
Joined now by Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle, who is standing by. Alistair, good morning to you. Interesting conversation there with the Defence Secretary a few moments ago, reflecting on how distasteful it will be symbolically to see the Taliban flag flying over what was British Embassy, and also the airlift speeding up.
Well, I think you're going to have to accept now that images like the Taliban, the white Taliban flag flying over locations like the British Embassy, the US Embassy, the Presidential Palace in central Kabul is fait accompli. The Taliban have declared the war over, and there's no denying that they have won a 20-year struggle, and very quickly indeed. The matter of days, really, to sweep across the country in a stunning blitzkrieg that took most people by surprise, although some US intelligence analysts I read said that they had forewarned the White House that this might happen, but their warnings were not heeded. And so Afghanistan this morning is waking up to a new power base. It is the same power base that existed in the country 20 years ago, but will it have a different philosophy? Will it have a different strategy for governing the country? Or will it be the same old Taliban that governs in a very strict religious manner and diminishes the rights and freedoms, particularly of women in the country? That is the great fear, and I don't think there's an awful lot that the international community can do about it if that is the way it goes. For now, the immediate priority of the international community, as you spoke to with Ben Wallace, is to get both Britons and any Afghans who have helped the British effort over the last 20 years out of the country. It won't be straightforward. They're looking at lifting anywhere between 1,200 and 1,500 a day, but we've been seeing those scenes from the airport this morning. It is utterly chaotic, it is desperate, and it is extremely sad, actually, as you watch so many hundreds and thousands of Afghans trying to climb on board aircraft like that, do anything they can do to try and leave the country with no signs of help to do that. That is, I should say, the civilian side of the airport. It's a big airport, Hamid Karzai International Airport, and on the other side, the northern end, pretty much as you're looking down, that is the military side. So this does not necessarily reflect the scene on the ground where the British and the Americans have it a little bit more under control. But what it does reflect is the fear in the country and the desperation not to live under the rule of the Taliban. And one final thing, Kay, that I would pick up from the interview that you've just conducted with Ben Wallace is the potential for terrorist groups to harbour themselves in Afghanistan once again. Of course, 9/11 was the reason that forces went in to get rid of al-Qaeda. Well, I was with the Afghan National Security Advisor, now the former National Security Advisor, only a couple of weeks ago. He did not see this coming, but what he did say is that he saw elements of al-Qaeda within the Taliban, and he made the point that extremist groups don't operate in silos.
OK. For now, Alistair, thank you. Still to come on the programme for you. What responsibility does the United States have for the Taliban's takeover? I'm going to be talking to a former UK ambassador to the US at 8:15. And at 8:45, we'll get the reaction of Sir Nicholas Kay. He's the former UK ambassador to Afghanistan, who was stationed in Kabul just 2 years ago. And then at 9:30, we'll speak to Lord Richard Dannett, former head of the British Army, about Britain's role in the conflict. The US is reportedly sending another 1,000 troops to Afghanistan and says it's secured the airport to the northern end. But there's been no word from President Biden, who's facing the most serious test of his presidency so far. Our US correspondent Mark Stone joining us this morning. Hello to you, Mark, live from Washington. Where is the president?
He is at Camp David, Kay, his country retreat, the presidential country retreat. He's been there through the weekend, and there are growing calls this morning for him to get back here, to get back to Washington, to the White House, and to address the nation. His schedule at the moment says he won't do that. He will remain at Camp David. The only sight of him we've had over the course of the weekend is a couple of still images showing him cutting rather a lonely figure, sitting in a briefing room at Camp David with that screen there, receiving what we are told are regular updates. In terms of what we can expect today, we may hear from President Biden, but it's not been confirmed yet. We will hear from the State Department this evening, your time. There will be a briefing from Ned Price, the State Department spokesman, or maybe even from Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State. We're not expecting an update from the Pentagon. Up in New York, there will be a meeting of the UN Security Council, so expect something out of that. I think there are some urgent well, clearly many challenges and many implications from what is an all-American decision. Let's remember that this is on Joe Biden. He inherited a deal, a so-called peace deal, from his predecessor Donald Trump, but he made the decision to follow through with it and to pull troops out. There are immediate implications, and we're seeing them unfold on the tarmac at Kabul International Airport right now. And then there are the longer-term implications. What does this say about America? What does it say about how Western countries can rely on America? You heard Ben Wallace there talking about America being the framework on which NATO stands. If America doesn't do something, it is now clear NATO cannot follow through without America. What does it mean for Afghanistan? We just don't know at the moment. So plenty of unanswered questions. And there is also, Kay, the domestic politics. One of the key reasons why Joe Biden followed through and decided to end this, to pull the troops out, is because he knows that it plays well domestically. He knows that his predecessor, Donald Trump, said he would do the same thing. Of course, predictably, Donald Trump is now saying, oh, I wouldn't have done it this way. I'd have done it very differently, and is calling for Joe Biden to resign. You might say he would say that, but domestically, this makes things very difficult for Joe Biden. And internationally, this, as you say, is a huge challenge, perhaps the issue that will define his presidency.
OK, for now, thanks, Mark. Afghan officials say the former president, perhaps Ashraf Ghani, fled the country as the Taliban moved further into Kabul. Let's bring in our Moscow correspondent, Diana Magnay, who's standing by for us this morning. There were some thoughts about where he was originally, potentially not in that country anymore. What do we know, Diana? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. It is unclear where he's gone. Former President Ashraf Ghani left a message on Facebook saying that he fled the country to avoid further bloodshed and clashes in the capital, Kabul. And there were reports that he'd gone initially to Tajikistan, then reports that he hadn't gone there, he'd gone to Uzbekistan. And the latest that I've seen on Russian wires is a source telling Interfax that there were no requests for his plane to land in the Uzbek capital, Tashkent, and that source saying he wasn't there either. So it is very unclear where he is. And of course, I would imagine that he doesn't really want people to know where he is, especially in these very early days, especially with the reaction of quite a few, I would imagine, back in Afghanistan, feeling that he has fled to safety and left his people high and dry, essentially to face the Taliban on their own. Now, Russia has called for the UN Security Council to meet this afternoon alongside a host of other countries. Russia has always had fairly lukewarm relations with President Ashraf Ghani, but what it has tried to do in Afghanistan is to maintain talks really with all parties. So it has, despite calling the Taliban an extremist organization that's banned in Russia here in Moscow since 2018, and tried to receive security assurances from them. And that seems to have paid off, where we've seen the UK and the US embassies shuttered. Russia says that it has received assurances, security assurances from the Taliban, and its operations there continue. What Russia is most concerned about is instability from Afghanistan rippling out. It won't trust the Taliban's assurances, but it has, Kay, tried to bolster the borders and its military operations alongside Uzbekistan and Tajikistan especially. OK, Diana, for now, thanks so much indeed. Thank you.
This is a live image from downtown Kabul this morning. And you can see it looks very quiet there at the moment. Is it the calm before the storm? Has it been the peaceful transition that the Taliban is telling us about? Very different images at the airport, particularly to the domestic side of the airport. I can tell you that our man in Afghanistan, along with his staff, are still there, although 300, you can see this is the domestic side of the airport. To the north of the airport is where the military part of the airport is, and it seems to be much calmer up there. Already 300 Brits are already back in the UK. We heard from Ben Wallace, who said 700 Afghans hopefully flown out in the next 24 hours or thereabouts. And the Brits are aiming to fly out between 1,200 and 1,500 people per day between now and when the Taliban finally decides that they want all foreigners out of Kabul. We will continue to monitor events for you. Meantime, let's find out what's happening as far as the weather's concerned here this morning. Naz is standing by. Hi, Naz. Good morning.
Good morning. It's looking less unsettled for this week as that low pressure that we had hanging around over the weekend has shifted away further eastwards, but it is going to be feeling cooler than recently as well.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. We had a weak area of low pressure hanging around over the weekend. It's now shifted away eastwards and we're seeing high pressure building from the west. But as it's still nearby, we've got more of a northerly flow developing. So although it's less unsettled this week, it is going to be feeling cool for the time of year compared to recently as well. Fine for most places this morning. A few showers scattered across the north of Wales and northwest England and northern and eastern areas. And some of those showers will carry on into this afternoon too. There will be quite a bit of cloud around, particularly across central, southern and western parts of the UK and Ireland, but there will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing for some bright spells. The best of the sunshine across the north and east of the UK. But then later, we will be seeing spells of heavy rain spreading to western Scotland, to parts of the north of Northern Ireland and the north of the Republic. It is also going to be rather a breezy, cool day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Many thousands of Brits and those that worked with the UK armed forces in Afghanistan are struggling to get out of Afghanistan as quickly as possible. Third country to start with, probably in the Middle East, then heading to RAF Brize Norton. British troops set off from there to help UK nationals. They'll be heading back there as well, along with Afghans and Brits that have managed to get out of the country. We're there live in just a moment.
The number of casualties of the wildfires declared on Monday rose on Wednesday to 69, including more than 20 soldiers fighting the fire. We deplore 600 families who have been homeless and more than 1,000 injured. The Algerian Red Crescent volunteers are bringing sanitary assistance and first aid to the benefit of the fire victims. There's also distribution of food and water brought by volunteers intervention team. Moreover, a caravan consisting of 6 ambulances, specialized doctors, parapharmaceutical products, humanitarian donation is being sent to assist the victim of the fires. All the rescued families have been taken in charge, so rescue shelters have been settled up and children psychological support have been organized since the beginning of the fires. And on the international level, the Algerian Red Crescent has launched an appeal to strengthen its humanitarian assistance to its partners within the international humanitarian movement. We have launched an appeal, and we count on the international solidarity of Red Cross and Red Crescent movements, and then our partners, and of course the solidarity of the Algerian citizens, and of course also the Algerian authorities. We are offering shelters, we are offering food and water. We also distribute masks, gloves because of this pandemic, COVID. And we are trying to relieve people who are in need.
I use not only design, but biology to create new materials which actually are fully sustainable and biodegradable. Because of COVID, there was a mass increase of single-use plastics being discarded. So for me, it seemed like a great opportunity to have a material which didn't have a longevity of plastic but could degrade back into the earth.
Hello again, everybody. The Defence Secretary has said it is with great sadness that we've watched Afghan Defence Forces fall to the Taliban so quickly. Speaking to us a short time ago, he said the deal that the US struck with the Taliban last February was naive.
I think we all saw that and felt a real sense of sadness that, first of all, the forces that the British and the international community had invested in had melted away in some areas so quickly. I think it was always the lessons that I felt were incredibly important, is that you don't fix things overnight in global issues. You have to manage them. And, ultimately, as I've said a number of times publicly, when that deal was done a few years ago, what happened was ultimately we undermined the community, the deal undermined the Afghan government and left it in a place that ultimately saw the end. And the end is always, I'm afraid, the river flows fastest towards the end. And that is what we saw yesterday, and it's what we're seeing in our pictures today.
Tamara's with us. Thoughts, Tamara?
Well, just to dwell on that for a second, he says Afghanistan is now in the hands of the Taliban. Our embassy is no longer our embassy. We're trying to get British nationals and the Afghans who helped us to the airport and out of the country. And it's clear that over the next couple of days, the focus is going to be on making sure that evacuation happens. It's a race against the clock, as he was suggesting there. Ben Wallace said he had engaged with the Taliban, actually, via a third country to try and ensure that our citizens will get out safely. But it's very unpredictable, as we saw with those scenes at the airport. He said the goal is to get 1,200 to 1,500 people, that's Brits, Afghans, embassy personnel, out a day. So it should be concluded in a matter of days, but it's going to be a very fraught time as that is underway. And while there are around 4,000 British citizens and 2,000 Afghans already processed, there are potentially thousands more Afghans who will be clamouring to try and get a place on one of those planes, people who helped us during the conflict, and say that their lives are at risk or that they will have already been targeted since the Taliban began their takeover. So a fraught few days. And then, of course, we've got the recall of Parliament on Wednesday, where one of the key questions will be, how did we fail to foresee this happening, and also what role will Britain play in trying to prevent it becoming a humanitarian catastrophe? How many refugees might we take? How will we work with other countries to try and prevent it, as Boris Johnson put yesterday, again becoming a haven for terrorism?
OK, for now. Tamara, thank you. Meantime, the Defence Secretary also gave us an update on the airlift operation as British troops tried to help UK nationals and Afghans out of Kabul.
The military side of the airport, so the footage you're seeing is from the south side, the civilian side. The military side of the airport is secure and controlled, and military flights are coming in and out. And I think on Friday when I spoke to you, I told you we had a plan B, which was if civilian flights stop, we will use military flights. That is what we're doing. The military flights are coming in and out. They've just brought in more UK soldiers, border forces joining us to make sure that we accelerate the process to get more Afghans out.
Well, Aisha is at RAF Bryce Norton for us this morning. Hello to you. Good morning. We know that that's where the military personnel set off from to head to Afghanistan. We don't know when they'll be bringing everybody home yet.
Yep, that's right. So 600 troops were deployed from here. They arrived in Kabul yesterday. And the operation is well underway to get British nationals back, as well as Afghans who've helped the British forces during this time. It fears that they could be face reprisals from the Taliban if they don't come back. Now, in the early hours, we did see an RAF Voyager land back here at Bryce Norton. It's not been confirmed whether this was one of the repatriation flights or not. But we heard from Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, earlier this morning, and he confirmed that the military side of Kabul airport was still operating, and around 300 people did arrive back yesterday. He said around 700 Afghans will be flown back within the next 24 hours, and their aim is to get 1,200 to 1,500 people back every single day. He said they're going to do as much as possible to get people back, and it's something the Prime Minister also said yesterday following the Cobra meeting that was held. He said that they will do as they will try to get people out as soon as we can. The Prime Minister said that they've got the resources to do this, but if it's a question of whether they can get this done within the next few days.
OK, for now, thanks, Aisha. So 300 people already back home, according to the Defence Secretary. Many thousands still need to be airlifted out of Kabul, relying on the patience of the Taliban at the moment. How long will that last before they want their airport back? More on that takeover of Afghanistan throughout the show. But first, from today, people in England who are fully vaccinated against coronavirus no longer have to isolate if they come into contact with someone who has tested positive. People will instead be advised to take a PCR test, but will not have to self-isolate while they wait for the results. Joined now by a Professor of Social Psychology at the University of St Andrews and Independent Sage member Stephen Riker. Although you are not speaking in that capacity today, I just should put that in as a rider before you say anything. It's good to see you, Professor. Thanks for joining us on the programme. So, rules change from today. You won't have to self-isolate if you've come into contact with somebody who's had COVID, as long as you are double vaccinated. Good idea?
Well, first of all, Kate, let me say that all the news from Afghanistan does, of course, make our problems seem, well, it does put them in perspective somewhat, and it's difficult to talk about COVID on a day like today, but it is a big change. I am, on the one hand, concerned because it does seem to be taking a big risk at a time when infections are 30 times what they were last year, and despite all the good work of the vaccine, still hospitalizations are 10 times what they were last year to relax the rules. Having said that, I am a relative optimist. When there were the relaxations on the 19th of July, many people, including myself, and I was wrong, thought that infections would skyrocket. And the reason why we were wrong, in large part, obviously there are many factors, but one of the reasons was the good sense of the public. The public continued to be cautious, continued to limit their socialization, continued to wear masks and to socially distance. And the good sense of the public, in many ways, kept us safe. However, there are two caveats to that. For the public to act with good sense, they need two things. The first is clear information. And I think it's really important to stress, again, that while the vaccines are a tremendously good thing, they, for instance, greatly reduced the extent to which you get hospitalized if you get infected. They're not perfect. So whereas it used to be about 10% of people with COVID got hospitalized, it fell to about 2%. Now it's back up to about 3%, but you can still be hospitalized. You can still get infected. You can still infect others. So I think it's really important to say to people that having a PCR test is absolutely vital. It should be more than just do it if you want to do it. It's absolutely vital. And what's more, I think it would have made sense to ask people to self-isolate until they get the results of that test. But at the very least, be cautious. Be cautious around vulnerable people. Don't go out too much. Don't go into crowded spaces. So we need really clear information about how to keep ourselves safe and how to keep others safe. And the second factor is this. See, one of the problems of this whole debate is that when we talk about COVID measures, we often talk in terms of restrictions, as if all measures are restrictions. But many of the measures are actually support for us. They're protections which allow us to do the right thing, support to allow us to self-isolate and so on. And the problem is that if you now make it a choice to people as to whether to take a test and therefore to have to self-isolate if you're positive, people aren't going to take that test if they can't afford to be positive. So we need to give people more support so they can self-isolate if they need to. We need to give people the support so they can make the right choices to keep themselves safe and to keep others safe.
Do you think that people will change their attitude, their approach now, that they won't have to self-isolate if they come into contact with somebody who's had COVID? Do you think people will feel freer?
Well, how people behave is absolutely critical. What all the analyses, what all the models tell you is the effects of the changes in measures are critically dependent upon our behaviour. So let me give you one very simple example. Before the pandemic, we interacted with about 12 different people every week. That fell to about 3 at the height of the pandemic earlier this year. It's now about 4. If everybody suddenly went back to pre-pandemic levels, it would triple the amount of interactions we have and therefore vastly increase the transmission and vastly increase the R rate, therefore making it very, very difficult to control the pandemic. So our behaviour is absolutely critical, and that's why the messaging is so important. If you give the message to people that once you're double vaccinated, you are in fact immune, invulnerable, that you can't get infected, you can't infect others, you're not going to be hospitalized. There is a very real danger that we increase the extent to which we socialize and we undermine the efforts against the pandemic. It's really important to have a balanced message. Yes, the vaccines are great. Yes, they've greatly reduced the impact of COVID, but they haven't got rid of it. So we need to continue to be careful and to be cautious, and we need to support people in acting carefully and cautiously. It's support that we need. And my fear is that in removing all measures, we remove the support necessary for people to take responsible decisions.
OK, Professor, let's wait and see how people behave. It's good to talk to you, as always. Thanks for joining us.
Good to talk to you too.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks a lot. Just looking at some more news reaching us here at Sky Centre, I can tell you that the latest we are hearing from the Reuters news agency is that more than 90% of Afghan state buildings are now under Taliban control. That's according to fighters at the scene. Taliban fighters, they've been ordered, we're told, not to cause any damage. That according to Taliban officials. In addition to that, we are being told that almost all major checkpoints are under Taliban control. So all major checkpoints, almost all major checkpoints are under Taliban control. Now that could be a challenge for some of these people who've made their way to the airport to try to flee the country as soon as the Taliban moved in to the capital, Kabul, about this time yesterday. But we are again hearing from the Taliban that everyone will be allowed to return home from the airport if they decide to stay. Civilians will not be harmed. That is what a Taliban official is saying, that people who clamoured to the airport to try and get on these domestic aircraft, none of them are taking off at the moment. If they return home, they will not be harmed. They will have to go through checkpoints, we're told, in downtown Kabul, but they will not be harmed. That is what the Taliban is saying at this stage. And they've certainly been seizing Afghanistan at a speed that few could have predicted. Much has been made of the role of the United States, with questions being asked about both the decision to withdraw troops and the speed of the withdrawal. But President Biden has said that he does not regret the move. Joined now by Sir Peter Westmacott, who was the UK's man in the United States when combat operations in Afghanistan formally ended in 2014. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Who would have thought that we would have seen Kabul fall so speedily and potentially without bloodshed?
I think you're right. It is a surprise that it fell quite so fast. Although people I've spoken to who've been on the ground, I haven't been in Afghanistan myself for a few years, but I do talk to people who are there regularly. They all said the moment that the deadline is set, you will be amazed, or maybe you won't be amazed, but the Taliban will take over the country in no time because there just isn't the will to fight. And the problem, of course, is not just that the Americans in particular and some of the other forces like the British who've been there holding the fort, if you like, were going. It is that they've withdrawn the intelligence, the support, the maintenance, the drones, the different elements that would have made it possible for the Afghan security forces to make a stand. And I think what's been a big surprise and obviously disappointment is the Afghan security forces, for those reasons and for others, perhaps because they didn't entirely believe that they were fighting for a viable government, collapsed so quickly. Lack of bloodshed, well, yes, we are hearing horrible stories of nasty things happening. Anyone who's been wearing a military uniform has been summarily murdered on their doorstep, and so on. There's been looting. There have been people pretending to be Taliban who are actually just rioters and thugs, helping themselves to people's private possessions, foreign embassies being looted and so on. But so far, you're right, it looks like a minimal bloodshed. And I think it's very important that 60 different governments have issued that statement, calling for order and saying you must allow those who want to leave the country to do so in good order.
Rory Stewart told us on the programme last Friday that what's happening is our fault, as in the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom's government, and that we must deal with the fallout as a result. Do you agree with his assessment?
I think it was very surprising that both the British Defence Secretary and the Chief of the Defence Staff, Nick Carter, said, back at the time, that they were disappointed by the American decision to set a date for withdrawal. We've had experience of this, whether it was in Aden or in India donkeys years ago and so on. if you set a date rather than conditions for withdrawal of a foreign force, for whatever reason why it is there, the danger is that the people who want to take over will just run down the clock and they will be ready to help themselves. So I think, the British authorities did see the risk in what was going to happen. I don't think they were properly consulted by their colleagues in Washington, allies in Washington, which I regret. But I think it is on all of us. The British were the second most important foreign power in Afghanistan after the United States of America. It behooved all of us to try to get this right. I think people were taken by surprise. And we do now have a big responsibility to try to ensure that the collateral damage is minimal. And not just that our own people and our own local employees are evacuated, but those people who've been working for humanitarian organizations or universities or for private security companies defending our embassies and so on, that those people whose lives are in danger must also be considered legitimate for political asylum if they want to leave the country as well. Because I'm afraid evidence suggests that we cannot rely on the word of the Taliban. They've broken it so many times in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we have, of course, are responsible for our own military operations. I've heard from the Defence Secretary this morning. He's saying that British forces returning to Afghanistan not on the cards anytime soon. What should our response be next? Are we just washing our hands and leaving the good people of Afghanistan to the Taliban?
Well, I hope we're not just going to wash our hands of this. We've been there along with the Americans for 20 years. The immediate requirement, as I say, is to try to deal with the humanitarian issues right now. Those who need to leave the country, who've got legitimate reason to fear for their lives and the safety of their families, we've got to help them. We've got to engage with those who are now in charge to try to ensure that they mean what they say, hold them to those commitments, that there will not be violence, that there will not be looting, that there will be order, that there will not be recriminations and revenge taken on people who they don't like the look of. And we've also got to, one way or another, engage with them and the international organizations to try to ensure that some of those gains, in fact, all the few gains, I should say, in terms of treatment of women and girls and going to schools and a degree of tolerance of ordinary human rights are maintained, that all that isn't lost now that the Taliban, 20 years later, are back in charge. The risk is that some of those people are not under the control of the political leaders who are talking to the Americans in Doha, and that they think that they've run America and the rest of us out of Afghanistan, which is not entirely false. And they think they've won, which is not entirely false either. So there will be a degree of hubris there. So we have to engage, all of us, not just the British and the Americans, but other governments which have been part of the coalition and international organizations, to try to ensure that there is minimum damage in the short term. And then if we can, if the Taliban will be prepared to engage with the rest of the world, try to do something about the development and the catastrophically fragile economy and social fabric of Afghan society.
So, Peter, sadly, we're out of time. Thank you for your expertise this morning, as always. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.